If someone told you your name isn't yours anymore, would you believe them? I didn't. Not at first. Not even when I held the letter in my hand, reading it twice, then a third time, like the words might rearrange themselves into something reasonable. It was a Monday. The kind of Monday where the fluorescent lights in a bank office make you feel like you're already guilty of something. I'd come in to apply for a small loan, nothing life-changing, just a smart move to consolidate some bills. But the clerk, a young guy named Blake, face too polite for the situation, blinked twice, then glanced at his screen, then at me. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vexler, but your request's been denied." He hesitated before saying it, which made me sit up straighter. "There's already a loan under your name," he added. I frowned. "No, there isn't. I've never—" "It's quite large," he said. $347,000. I thought he was joking, but he wasn't smiling. I leaned forward, heart rate slowing to a crawl. "Print it," I said. He clicked. The printer whirred behind him. I remember the sound more than what came next. On paper, it was me, my name, my social security number, and not my address, not my job history, not my contact info. It was like looking at a version of me that had lived a life I knew nothing about. I walked out of that bank with a handful of papers and a hole in my chest. The wind outside bit through my coat. I didn't go straight home. I walked. Just walked, past a dry cleaner, a corner deli, a laundromat where the same man was always smoking out front. He nodded at me. I didn't nod back. By the time I reached my apartment, the numbness had worn off. I went straight to my desk, booted up my computer, and started pulling credit reports. I didn't even need coffee. The adrenaline did the job. 5 new accounts, all opened in the last 2 years. One of them traced back to my childhood home address. Another used an old phone number I hadn't thought about since I was 25. I sat back in my chair. Who could have done this? Not a stranger. That much was clear. There was no forced access, no leak, no phishing email. This was personal. But the problem with personal is, it narrows the list of suspects to people who've seen your handwriting since you were 8. People who know the middle name on your birth certificate. People who told you they'd keep your documents safe, in the cabinet. I stared at my screen. My jaw tightened, but I didn't curse, didn't cry. I called the customer service number on the report. Halfway through the call, I hit a wall. "Sorry," the woman on the line said. "We can't provide additional information unless you verify from the original email address on file." "I'm calling about identity theft," I said. "I understand, but the system shows the user has already verified, using that same name, my name." "I want the full profile," I told her. Her voice lowered, like someone at her desk might overhear. "This kind of situation," she said, "usually involves someone close." That word, close. It stung in a place I didn't know was still tender. I hung up. I sat in silence. Then I pulled out a notepad, wrote down every name that came to mind. People who'd had access to my ID, my social, anything official. My parents, my sister, one ex. The list was short, but the feeling in my gut was clear, the kind of clarity that hits just before the worst thing becomes real. Then I remembered a moment from 6 months ago. My mother standing at the hallway closet during Thanksgiving, waving a file in her hand. "Don't worry," she'd said. "We keep everything safe in the cabinet." My pen stopped. The tip rested on one name, Maribel. I froze. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could. Everything fit. Too well. The handwriting, the timeline, the address. My fingers went cold. My stomach folded in on itself. "No," I whispered. "It can't be her." But there was no one else it could have been. I stood there in my apartment, surrounded by printouts, credit reports, files with my name on them, but none of them really mine. I looked at the mirror across the room. "If I'm not me anymore," I said aloud, the words like sandpaper, "then who am I to them? The drive from Philadelphia to Lancaster felt longer than it actually was. Cold clouds hung low over the highway, and the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled settled in the car with me. I didn't turn on the radio, didn't make a call. I was rehearsing things in my head, over and over, like some courtroom drama where I finally laid it all out. But in my gut, I already knew. There wouldn't be a scene. There'd be small talk. Smiles. Denial. A warm meal served over cold lies. I hadn't been back in months. The house hadn't changed much. Same shutters, same porch swing that creaked even without wind. But now there were 2 new locks on the front door. And more mail piled in the box than usual. Someone had been letting things sit. I stood there for a while, hand hovering over the doorknob, key in the other. My fingers trembled a little, but not from nerves, from knowing exactly what kind of welcome waited on the other side. Lois opened the door like she'd been expecting a delivery. Her smile was tight. "You didn't say you'd be here so soon," she said, pulling me into a half hug that felt like a polite handshake. Wendell didn't look up from the football game playing in the living room, just grunted in acknowledgement like I was a neighbor dropping off mail. Maribel wasn't home. "She's out with friends," Lois said, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. "She'll be back later tonight." They offered me a seat. I took it. The tea was weak, the conversation weaker. Lois talked about church events, Wendell grunted a few more times at the TV, and no one said a word about money, loans, or why I'd really come. I glanced around the room. Same wallpaper, same furniture. But the family photo on the wall had changed. Not the image, but the framing. I was on the edge, cropped slightly, as if I had always been halfway out. I waited until dinner. The table was set like it was Thanksgiving, though there were only 3 of us. Lois brought out meatloaf. Wendell passed the potatoes. Then I cleared my throat. "Did you know someone's been using my name?" Lois's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "We were hoping you'd let that go," she said. "It's family." Wendell leaned back in his chair, voice calm. "Maribel needed help. You're strong. We didn't think you'd mind." That's what broke me. Not the theft, the justification, the calculation behind their silence, like my stability gave them permission to dismantle my identity for convenience. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just sat there chewing the dry meatloaf, nodding slowly. Not because I agreed, but because it was the only way to keep from flipping the entire table over. Afterward, I went upstairs. My old room was gone. In its place, a beige guest room with fresh sheets and no history. My books were gone. The photos, even the blue ribbon I won in 4th grade for writing, they'd been donated. No one had asked. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls, not angry anymore, not even disappointed, just done. Hours passed. Sometime close to midnight, I heard Maribel's car pull into the driveway, tires crunching over the gravel like it always had. Then a knock, not on the door, but right outside my room. Lois's voice was barely a whisper. "Don't make this a big deal, okay?" I woke up in a room that used to be mine. Now it felt like a showroom, sterile, generic, like it belonged to someone who had never lived a real childhood. The posters were gone. The bookshelf had been replaced by a lamp that didn't match anything. Even the closet doors creaked like they were resisting the memory of who I was. I stepped into the hallway, barefoot on cool wood floors, and past the portraits that lined the wall. I'd seen them before, but this time I looked longer. One photo from my high school graduation, my face cropped at the edge like I had barely made the cut. Another from a Christmas morning, everyone smiling except me. Except, I wasn't even in that one. They'd replaced it. Or maybe they'd just chosen a version of the day that didn't include me. Lois was already in the kitchen, setting out breakfast like we were still doing this ritual every Sunday. Eggs, toast, no eye contact. "Hungry?" she asked, too quickly. "I'm okay," I replied, settling into the chair. "We didn't talk about what happened the night before, or why I had shown up unannounced, or why Maribel still wasn't home. She was staying with a friend, apparently. Convenient. I stirred my coffee and stared at the rim of the cup. Is the cabinet still in the attic? I asked. Lois didn't answer immediately. Her fingers paused over the butter dish. Then, without looking at me, she nodded. Yes, haven't touched it in years. And that was that, back to silence. By late morning, I was in the attic. Dust hung in the air, dancing in stripes of sunlight from the narrow window. The cabinet stood in the corner just as I remembered it, heavy, locked with a rusted latch that had never really worked. I pried it open. Inside were the old tax folders, school documents, and everything else my mother had sworn she was keeping safe. I rifled through file after file, and then I saw it. My high school writing portfolio. It had a sticker I remembered placing myself. Final drafts, senior year. I opened it. Inside was the essay, the one I stayed up writing for 3 weeks, the one that got me praised by my English teacher, even published in the school magazine. But the cover page didn't have my name. It had Maribel's. My stomach sank. There was another folder tucked in the back labeled Scholarship Apps, Maribel. I opened it with shaking hands. There it was, same essay. Submitted to 3 different schools under her name. The memory of her being handed the letter of acceptance. The way Mom cried with joy. How Dad poured whiskey that night. It all slammed into me. I stood there, holding the truth, feeling like I was watching the crime scene of a life stolen. And not recently. This started before the ink was dry on my first adult paycheck. I whispered. It started earlier than I thought. I kept digging. Toward the bottom of the cabinet was a stack of unopened mail. IRS. Social Security. And even bank documents addressed to me, dating back 5 years. All marked Hold for Harlan in my father's handwriting. These weren't just misplaced, they were hidden. Some of the letters warned of activity under my name. One from the credit bureau was a request for confirmation of a loan application. I never saw it, never had the chance to respond. This wasn't negligence, this was calculated. They didn't just allow the theft, they made sure I'd never find out until it was too late. I stared at the pile, hands trembling. They erased me before they even stole me. The realization sat in my chest like a stone. I picked up my phone, called the credit bureau again. This time I asked for everything. The full printout, every line, every loan, every fake address. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak much. I just asked questions and took notes. Back in the attic, I laid everything out like an evidence board. Photos of the envelopes, the essay, the signatures. I labeled each file with dates, timestamps, source, not because I wanted revenge, because if I didn't do this, it would disappear, just like I almost did. I whispered into the empty air. How many people did they tell I was the one who walked away? There's a moment when you shift, when you stop trying to be understood and start collecting proof. I had crossed that line, not with fury, not with fear, with cold, quiet resolve. If no one else remembers what I gave, I said, I will. I was taking a picture of the last envelope when I heard it. What are you doing in my stuff? I turned. Maribel stood at the attic entrance, arms folded. Her voice calm but tight, like she already knew what I'd found. I didn't flinch. I held up the folder, her name on the front, my words inside it. All afternoon, Maribel floated around the house like nothing had happened. She was loud in the kitchen, humming, opening and closing cabinets just enough to be heard, not enough to start a conversation. Every time I looked at her, she looked past me, not through me, past me, like I was the background of a house she didn't even live in anymore. Lois, of course, acted like she had no clue there was a tension so thick it could slice the roast she was about to serve. Let's sit down like a real family again, she chirped, as if Sunday dinners ever fixed what people didn't have the guts to talk about. She set the table with her mother-of-pearl flatware, but mine was different. The spoon had a small nick. My napkin was cloth, yes, but a shade off, a detail no one else would care about. But in that house, I'd learned to read the silent language of how people are seated and what that says. Wendell stood at the head of the table, carving meat with the precision of a man who believed everything had its place, especially daughters who didn't make a fuss. And there I was, sitting between a father who wouldn't look at me and a mother who smiled too wide, pretending not to notice I hadn't said more than 10 words since breakfast. We were halfway through dinner when it happened. Maribel, glass in hand, cleared her throat. I just want to say how grateful I am, she began, looking around the table. We've all supported each other through hard times, especially with Harlan. I'm just glad we could help her feel stable again. Wendell nodded, lifted his glass. Lois smiled as if someone had just thanked her for raising perfect children. I stared at my fork, halfway to my mouth. That was the moment I understood. Not only had they allowed this, they'd rewritten it. In their version, I was the one who'd needed help. I was the unstable one. And their generosity, their silence, were the heroes of that narrative. I didn't speak. I didn't break anything. I just looked at each of them, one by one, and tried to remember the last time I'd felt like I had a place at that table. It wasn't just insulting, it was erasure. The flashbacks came in pieces. Me wiring money for Wendell's emergency procedure, me sending groceries during the lockdown, me quietly paying off Maribel's credit card without a word to anyone. They knew, and they'd twisted it into something else. Halfway through dessert, my phone buzzed under the table. Cassian. Text. I need to talk. I didn't know she'd used your name again. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. There it was. Forwarded email, 2 weeks ago, from Maribel's address, but signed with my name, requesting financial help from a former contact of mine. She used my name like a mask. Cassian thought it was me. Of course he did. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe deep. I just stared at the screen and deleted it, not out of forgiveness, but because I was too tired to archive every scar. When I walked back to the table, I smiled for the first time all day. Not warmth, not welcome, just control. To the people who give, I said, raising my glass, even when no one remembers. The silence that followed was thick. Wendell blinked once. Lois looked down. Maribel pretended to laugh. That's not necessary, Lois muttered. Maribel chuckled. Always the poet. I set my glass down. No, just the record keeper. The clink of glass hitting wood echoed louder than the TV in the next room. Wendell's tone shifted. We're trying to have a peaceful dinner. I didn't look at him. Then stop building it on my silence. Lois dropped her napkin. It fluttered to the floor like her last defense had just given up. Maribel stood, walked to the kitchen like she needed water or distance. I followed her with my eyes, letting the moment settle. Then I spoke, calm as ever. I know what you've done, Maribel, and I'm not the only one who will. I woke up still wearing what I'd had on the night before. I hadn't even taken off my shoes. The room was cold, the air flat. I didn't feel like someone who'd slept. I felt like someone who'd shut down. Everything from dinner was still playing out in my head, not the parts they said out loud, but the ones they chose to keep quiet. It was the silence that got me more than anything, the unspoken agreement to pretend. I sat up slowly, back aching, mouth dry. I tried to list everything I'd ever done for them. Grocery money during the layoffs, quietly paying the insurance gap when Dad's Medicare didn't kick in, letting Maribel stay in my apartment for 3 months after she got out of that situation. And now I was the unstable one, the one they helped. I stepped outside. The porch creaked under my weight like it wanted to protest my return. The sky was overcast, but it wasn't raining. It was just dull, like the world had muted itself to match the mood. I paced. Once, twice. Then I made the decision. If they won't fix it, I said to no one, I will. Back inside, I called the bank where I'd first filed the fraud report. The rep on the line pulled up my case, hesitated. We received a call last week to withdraw your complaint, he said. It's marked as resolved by the account holder. I asked for the file. 10 minutes later, it arrived in my inbox. I opened the PDF. My name, my social, my case number, signature, except it wasn't mine. It was my father's handwriting. Sloppier than usual, like he'd tried to disguise it, but I knew every curve of those letters. The kitchen was quiet when I walked in. Wendell was fixing his usual toast and black coffee. I placed the paper in front of him without a word. He looked down, read it, didn't flinch. "It would have destroyed her," he said. "I made an executive decision." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw the mug across the room, though part of me wanted to. I just looked at him. "You chose the one who needed to lie over the one who told the truth." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Later that morning, Lois found me on the porch holding a half-cold cup of coffee. She sat beside me like we were about to talk about the weather. "She didn't mean to hurt you," she said, soft like a prayer. "Maribel just needed help." I said nothing. "And we thought," she continued, "maybe it was time you gave something back. You're always so stable." I turned to face her. "You thought giving away my future was a gift?" Her lips pressed together, her eyes avoiding mine. "We didn't think you'd fight us on it," she said quietly. That told me everything I needed to know. I spent the next few hours packing, not everything, just what mattered. I left behind the old quilt, the hand-me-down lamp, the framed picture of all of us from a trip I hadn't wanted to take in the first place. There was no need to take what was never mine to keep. I called a lawyer I used to work with back in Philly. We didn't talk long, just enough to schedule a consultation and know it was in motion. Dinner was served again that night. I didn't touch the food. Instead, I placed an envelope in the middle of the table. "If one more thing shows up under my name," I said, "I'll prosecute, family or not." Wendell tried to speak. "No more decisions on my behalf," I said before he could form a sentence. Lois pushed her chair back, but didn't get up. Maribel looked like she wanted to throw the glass in front of her, but didn't. It was the quietest dinner they'd ever had. I picked up my bag, stepped toward the door. As I opened it, Lois called after me. "If you do this, you'll be alone." I didn't turn back. I just said no. I'll finally be with someone I trust. The morning air felt different. Not colder, but quieter. I stepped outside just after sunrise, not really knowing where I was going. Just moving. Letting my feet take me somewhere that wasn't filled with the sound of people pretending. A neighbor across the street glanced up from raking his leaves. He didn't smile. Another woman I recognized from church walked past with her dog. She looked directly at me, then quickly turned her head like she'd just remembered something urgent. I stopped at the edge of the driveway and opened my phone. A new post had popped up from one of Lois's old friends. It read, "Some people just don't appreciate what their families do for them. Sad, really." The names didn't have to be tagged. I wasn't dumb. "They're turning me into the villain of my own story," I whispered. I didn't respond, not yet, but I took screenshots, all of them. Later that morning, a cousin texted me, "You good? I heard you're making this bigger than it needs to be." I didn't answer. I was used to that tone, disguised concern that was really just judgment in Sunday clothes. Mom cornered me in the hallway before lunch. "You've always been sensitive, honey. Try not to take things so hard." Sensitive, that word again. Wendell, sitting in the living room with his legs crossed and glasses perched on his nose like a judge on break, added, "You know how dramatic she gets." I wasn't mad, I was exhausted. They'd been rehearsing this script for years. I remembered being 10, watching Maribel knock over Grandma's antique vase. She cried. They looked at me. I said it was my fault. They let it stick. They needed someone to hold the weight of their mistakes so Maribel could shine. I checked my email while eating dry toast at the kitchen table. A fraud alert from a credit union I'd never heard of. I clicked. Apparently, someone had deposited a check for $11,000 using my social. I called immediately. The check was still in the system, flagged for unusual signature. I had them email me a scan. There it was, my name, my social, my forged signature. It looked like mine, except it didn't. I dug through my old things, found a birthday card from Maribel, held it up side by side. Same curve on the H, same loop on the V. My name, written like a costume she put on for financial gain. I forwarded both to my lawyer. His reply came in 5 minutes flat. This qualifies as financial identity theft. It's actionable. I stared at the screen. Did I want to be the one who took my own sister to court? No. Did I want to keep letting her wear my name like a coat she stole? No. That afternoon, Maribel showed up at the house. Her voice was light, too light. Are you seriously doing this to me? To Mom? I didn't get up from the porch swing. You already did this to yourself. I'm just documenting it. She narrowed her eyes. You've always needed to be the victim to feel powerful. I took a breath, looked at her. No. But apparently you've always needed a victim to feel important. She flinched, barely, but I caught it. That night, I was packing again when an anonymous email arrived. Subject line: You don't know half of what she's done. There was a file attached. I opened it. My face didn't change, but everything behind it did. The file loaded slowly. A spinning circle mocked me for 10 full seconds before the screen turned black. Then the image appeared. A zoom window, grainy but clear. Maribel and Lois, side by side, heads slightly tilted in toward the webcam, like they were discussing cake recipes, not betrayal. Maribel's voice came through first. She's sensitive. If we act surprised and loving, no one will question us. Lois responded without pause. It's her word against the family. That always works. I paused the video right there. I didn't need to hear more. I knew that tone. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't panicked. It was rehearsed. They didn't just deny what they'd done. They planned how to bury me with a smile on their faces. I sat still for a while, hands folded in my lap, phone screen dimming to black. Then I replayed that line. That always works. It had. For years. The next morning came quietly. The sky was too blue for what was coming. Lois insisted I attend the community event for Wendell's retirement. Just show your face, she said, like it was a favor. Like showing up meant forgetting everything that had been done. I went. The hall was packed. Folding chairs, store-bought cake, plastic forks. Wendell sat at the front like a war hero, and right next to him, Maribel, smiling, perfectly put together, always the daughter who knew how to shine under fluorescent lighting. When they called on Maribel to speak, she practically glided to the microphone. I just want to thank everyone who's been part of Dad's journey, she said, sweeping her eyes across the crowd. Our neighbors, our church family, Aunt Ruth, Uncle James, even Max, our old lab. He passed last year, but he was family. People laughed softly, nodded. Wendell wiped his eye. She never mentioned my name. Not once. I didn't flinch. I didn't storm out. I sat there in the second row, hands resting on my lap, eyes locked on her like a statue. Cassian, who had quietly slipped in and sat next to me halfway through, leaned over and whispered, She's not forgetting. She's erasing. After the speeches ended, I found Thera near the punch table, the only relative who had once pulled me aside and said, I believe you. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I asked her gently, You saw the email, didn't you? Her voice was flat. I was advised not to get involved anymore. Lois. It had to be Lois. I nodded, slow. When did this stop being about what's right? Thera hesitated, then walked away. There was a time when she covered for me. When I spilled juice on the new carpet at 9 and she said it was her. When I forgot my recital music and she hummed it quietly from the front row. Now she was just another ghost in a family full of live people. When the last thread unravels, I said to no one, You don't fall apart. You finally fall out. I didn't pack that night. I didn't leave. I wrote. I opened my laptop and started compiling every document, every bank record, every screenshot, every file. I created a folder titled, For the Record. I wrote an index, I cross-referenced dates, I added context, I listed all of it. Then I sent the file to my lawyer, and I CC'd them, Lois, Wendell, and Maribel. Subject line, This is no longer a private matter. I didn't expect a response. I didn't want one. I stared at the screen as it sent, breathing slow and deep. I used to think silence protected peace, I said. Now I know it only protects liars. It was past midnight when the doorbell rang. I didn't jump. I opened the door. Maribel stood there, fists clenched, eyes blazing. You think you can destroy me with one email? I held up the folder, printed, labeled, heavy in my hand. No, I said, but I'm just getting started. We met in a booth tucked in the far corner of a diner just outside town, neutral ground, the kind of place where nobody paid attention to anything but their pancakes. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. Notarized, time-stamped, all of it. I didn't even look at the contents again. I knew what was in there. When this goes out, it's public, he said. There's no going back. There's nothing to go back to, I replied. I uploaded the file to a private cloud link, scheduled it to go live at 10 a.m. the next day. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Silence only ever protected them, not me. That afternoon, I got a call from a bank I'd never spoken to before. The woman on the line sounded confused. We're trying to confirm some details. There's been a change in cosigner status for the mortgage on 427 Mayfield. That was Maribel's house. Except it wasn't. It was under my name, half of it anyway. She'd used me. Again. And now, with my name scrubbed from it, the payments bounced. The bank froze everything. 2 hours later, Wendell called. I picked up. I don't know why. What did you do? He snapped. She's losing everything. No, I said, calm and steady. She's just finally paying for it herself. Click. I didn't expect gratitude. But that tone, like I'd set fire to something sacred, confirmed what I already knew. In their eyes, I was still the problem. The next morning, 10:00 a.m., sharp, the link went live. Cassian had posted it on his blog with a short caption. When family loyalty becomes financial theft. It spread faster than I thought it would. Screenshots, PDFs, the forged checks, the Zoom recording of Lois and Maribel plotting their story. People read, people whispered, but this time it wasn't about me. A few old friends texted. One of Maribel's business partners reached out to say they'd severed ties. Cassian messaged me, just one word. It's moving. Lois didn't come out of the house for 3 days. Wendell stopped answering his phone. Maribel. Well, she kept posting like nothing happened. Quotes about forgiveness, a filtered selfie with Monday vibes, the usual mask. But the silence they once used to isolate me, now it surrounded them. Then came the final twist. In a public Facebook comment, someone asked Maribel if the house was really hers. She replied, "Of course. I've lived there for years. It was always mine." I didn't say much. I just posted a photo of the original deed. My name at the top. Caption, "Receipts matter." It went viral. Some people applauded. Others scolded me. Families shouldn't air their dirty laundry. But I didn't respond to any of it. Lois finally called, her voice cracked through the phone. "We're being humiliated." "No," I said. "You're being seen." That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the last light faded from the sky, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No return address. I opened it. Inside was a card. Yellowed, soft at the edges. Her handwriting. "We always knew you'd leave. We just didn't expect you to do it with a torch." I stared at it for a long time. Then I set it down and poured myself a glass of water. The key clicked in the lock with a sound that somehow felt unfamiliar, even though I'd done it 1,000 times before. I stepped into my apartment and shut the door behind me, resting my back against it for a moment. Not out of exhaustion, more like recognition. The silence didn't feel lonely, it felt earned. Everything was where I left it. The plants wilted a little. The mail stacked high on the entry table. Bills, flyers, one card in a familiar envelope. I set it aside without opening it, not because I was angry, just because it didn't carry weight anymore. Closure isn't always clean. Sometimes it's just quiet. I made tea. sat by the window, picked up my journal and wrote the first line in a long time. This time, it's just for me. Later that afternoon, I opened the card, addressed to Harold. Inside it read, "Congrats on your career advancement. You make us proud." Lois's handwriting. Rushed. No warmth, no awareness. That wasn't a mistake. That was the truth. They never saw me. Just the idea of who they wanted me to be. The stable one. The one who didn't need attention. The one who could absorb all the weight so Maribel could float. I snapped a photo of the card, not for evidence, not to share, just to remember, so I'd never tolerate being reduced to a version again. A few days later, Cassian dropped by to return a box I'd left behind during what we used to call a break. I didn't ask him to stay. He didn't offer. We were both older now in ways that had nothing to do with age. Inside the box was a framed photo from a family vacation, the kind they'd used to hang by the hallway. I looked closer. My image had been folded back behind the frame. A neat crease ran right through my arm. They didn't crop me by accident. They did it because the picture looked better without me in it. That same photo still hung in their house. When they said they didn't want to lose me, the truth was, they already had. Because they'd erased me long before I walked away, I spent the next evening sorting through old emails, clearing out files. In the middle of it, I found one forwarded message. A family friend had emailed Lois to congratulate me on earning my master's degree. Lois's reply, "It's just a certification. She's still figuring herself out." That one stung. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it was deliberate. Years of study, late nights, debt, sacrifice, summed up and dismissed in one sentence. I didn't cry. I smiled. The sadness was gone. What replaced it wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. They needed me to stay small, because they couldn't grow. That night, I pulled out the birthday card from that first week, the one I'd kept in a drawer, too wrinkled to mean anything, too sharp to forget. This time I didn't tear it. I flipped it over and wrote on the back. This was the last time I mistook silence for strength. Then I burned it in a small ceramic dish on the balcony, not for revenge, but release. When the flame flickered out, I stood, poured a glass of water, and washed the ash down the sink. The next morning, I walked out my door. No makeup, no umbrella, no explanation. The world was loud again. I didn't mind. I didn't need them to say sorry. I just needed to stop waiting for them to say my name right.